Since the tank's inception, there is a statement that remains true in warfare. A tank is better than no tank. Throughout history, the presence of armoured vehicles, even obsolete ones, have proven to be powerful tools in the right conditions. As far back as World War I, captured Entente tanks were repurposed by the German Imperial Army. The trend only grew during World War II, when the reuse and modification of captured enemy armour became widespread. The practice carried on through Cold War conflicts, and even today, in the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war, tanks continue to switch hands and find new life on the front lines. It would seem that no matter the era, some machines inevitably fall into the hands of the enemy. The Yugoslav wars of the 1990s were no exception, and many aging and obsolete weapons systems were pressed into service during the savage conflicts. One of the most interesting armoured fighting vehicles to appear during the Yugoslav wars was a modified T-55 tank. Instead of its standard turret, it carried the turret of a much older vehicle, the World War II-era M18 Hellcat. The Yugoslav wars were a series of brutal conflicts in the 1990s, born from the collapse of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. For decades, the six republics had coexisted under Marshal Tito, who held the country together with his policy of brotherhood and unity. But after his death, economic decline and rising nationalism tore at the fragile balance. In 1991, Slovenia and Croatia declared independence. Slovenia fought a brief 10-day war before the Yugoslav People's Army, or JNA for short, withdrew, while Croatia endured a longer and bloodier struggle as ethnic Serbs, backed by Belgrade, carved out their own territories in an attempt to secede from the already seceding republic. By 1995, Croatia had regained nearly all its land through a series of well-executed military operations, though at the cost of mass displacement and ethnic cleansing. While the Yugoslav conflicts in Slovenia and Croatia were marked by ethnic divisions and moral ambiguity, the Bosnian War is often described as the most heinous, due in large part to the region's diverse ethnic and religious makeup. Bosnia and Herzegovina was home to three principal groups: the Bosniaks, who were the predominantly Muslim majority, the Bosnian Serbs, who were largely Orthodox Christian, and the Bosnian Croats, a Catholic minority. Religious and cultural differences among these groups had long been a source of tension, and they would remain contentious even after the war's conclusion. On March 25, 1991, Croatian President Franjo Tudjman and Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic held a secret meeting in which they discussed dividing Bosnia and Herzegovina between their respective nations. This plan showed little regard for the Bosniaks, who were to be left with only a small, predetermined enclave of land. Nevertheless, in 1992, a referendum was held, in which roughly 60% of Bosnian citizens voted in favour of independence. This referendum was vehemently boycotted by the Bosnian Serb population. Nonetheless, Bosnian President Alija Izetbegović officially proclaimed independence on March 3, 1992. In April of 1992, the Bosnian Serbs rebelled, forming the Republika Srpska. The Republika Srpska, backed by the Serbian government and the JNA, managed to control over 60% of the country. The Bosnian Croats followed suit shortly thereafter, denouncing the Bosnian government and founding their own republic with the support of the Croatian government, named the Croatian Republic of Herceg-Bosnia. The Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats began to relentlessly engage in ethnic cleansing of the areas that they occupied. Soon, a savage three-sided war was being fought throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina. The bloodshed finally ended in late 1995 with the US-brokered Dayton Accords. Bosnia and Herzegovina survived as a single nation, but its governance was split among Bosniaks, Serbs and Croats, where each would have their own local government that would then convene at a national level. Due to the fact that most of the belligerents were not professional armies, and the international community's attempts to block an influx of new weapons to the Balkans, combatants were forced to often use weapons systems that were quite antiquated. This, alongside the reputation of the JNA to be a hoarding army that almost never threw away old equipment, led to the interesting modification and use of armoured fighting vehicles from decades past by all sides. Although all of the military organisations operating within the newly created Bosnian states had taken what they could from former JNA stocks, the Republika Srpska arguably benefited the most from the ex-JNA material. This, however, did not prevent all sides from pressing basically anything that was of any value into service in the mountainous and unforgiving terrain of Bosnia and Herzegovina. All sorts of outmoded armoured fighting vehicles began to pop up during the Bosnian War, including a variety of World War II era vehicles, such as the Soviet T-34-85 medium tank, as well as the American M18 Hellcat and M36 Jackson tank destroyers, all of which have been originally supplied to Yugoslavia during the early Cold War. One of the more modern tanks that had been a mainstay of the JNA was the Soviet T-55. The T-55 remains one of the most produced tanks in human history, and the JNA purchased quite a few. The T-55 was essentially an updated T-54 medium tank, featuring a more powerful drivetrain and better NBC protection, among other improvements. It retained the thick sloping frontal armour and powerful 100mm main gun of the T-54. While it lacked features such as the composite armour found on more modern tanks such as the M84, the T-55 was still highly resistant to older conventional anti-tank guns and other ageing weapon systems used during the Bosnian War. One account of the T-55 M18 hybrid's origin begins in 1991, when a Bosnian Serb militia operated a T-55 tank left behind by retreating JNA forces. During fighting with Bosniak troops, the tank was mobility killed, its tracks or engine disabled, forcing the crew to abandon it. The Army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, or ARBIH for short, soon captured and repaired the vehicle, adding it to their limited arsenal of heavy armour. In 1992, however, the tank's luck ran out once again. A Bosnian Serb anti-tank guided missile struck the turret, destroying it completely. The hull, still largely intact and drivable, was recovered by the Army of Republika Srpska, or VRS. With the original turret gone, VRS mechanics improvised an unlikely solution, mounting the turret of an M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, a relic from World War II. In almost every way, the Hellcat turret was inferior. It carried only a 76mm gun, had very thin armour, no roof, and was smaller than the T-55's original turret. Still, in the desperate conditions of the Bosnian War, even this unusual hybrid was better than nothing. Since the Hellcat turret ring was far smaller than the T-55's, a custom adapter ring was engineered, almost certainly at the Hadžići technical repair plant near Sarajevo. Once complete, the T-55 M18 crossbreed returned to combat in VRS service. It fought for about a year before becoming stuck in the mud during a retreat and was abandoned. Lacking recovery equipment, the VRS left it behind, only for Bosniak troops to haul it away and press it back into ARBIH service, where it remained until the end of the war. Still, this version of events is debated. Some veterans, including a former ARBIH soldier, doubt the story, pointing out that the capture of a T-55 would likely have been widely reported at the time. He instead offers a different theory. The story differs in that the tank was not reconstructed by mechanics of the VRS. Rather, it was a project that had been undertaken by the JNA, also done at the Hadžići technical repair plant, likely as the conflict was ongoing. It was then transferred to the Butile barracks in Sarajevo. When the VRS pulled back from Sarajevo, the vehicle was discovered by Bosniak troops and allegedly used for training. There is one final origin story for the T-55 M18 hybrid, but the only source that puts forth these claims is a short magazine article that has some factual errors, thus it appears to be less reputable. The final source, and the least likely, comes from the Tankograd Gazette, issue number 16, published in 2003. While there are exclusive photographs, the story has serious flaws. Firstly, the story claims that the tank hull is that of a T-54. This is not the case. The hull lacks the fixed machine gun firing port in the upper front plate, a feature only found on the T-54. The engine deck vents also match those of a T-55, not a T-54. The article goes on to state that 2 vehicles of this type were built before 1997 by Bosniak forces in order to circumvent a NATO decree banning them from operating tanks armed with guns larger than 85mm in caliber. Due to the misidentification of the base vehicle and the very concise yet lofty claims made by the article, this story appears to be the least likely to be true. While the Dayton Peace Agreement did place a 180-day ban on the importation of all heavy weapons, including tanks, there was no specific ban on caliber size for armoured vehicles. No matter who built the vehicle, it was clearly done quite professionally. The drastic difference between the age and roles of the 2 vehicles used to create the T-55 M18 also led to it having very unique characteristics. The hybrid's hull retained the full protection of a standard T-55. Its structure was built from welded rolled homogeneous armour plates, with the upper and lower glacis both 100mm thick, sloped at 60 degrees and 55 degrees. Hull sides were flat and 80mm thick, while the rear consisted of 3 plates, an upper section at 30mm angled at 60 degrees, a central 45mm plate at 17 degrees, and a lower 20mm plate at 70 degrees. The roof armour measured 30mm over the crew compartment and 15mm at the engine deck, with a 20mm floor plate. Overall, the T-55 M18 hull was very well protected against conventional kinetic anti-tank munitions, as well as a multitude of other threats present during the Bosnian War that would often decimate lighter vehicles, such as high-velocity anti-aircraft guns and high-explosive rounds. However, by the 1990s, newer anti-tank weapons utilizing shaped charge warheads, such as ATGMs, high-velocity discarding sabot rounds, and most portable anti-tank weapon systems, would have been able to defeat the hull armour of the T-55 M18. The turret, however, was another matter entirely. Being that of the M18 Hellcat, it offered almost no real protection. The curved gun shield was only 19mm thick, while the turret front was 25mm at 23 degrees, and the sides and rear just 13mm at shallow angles. This extreme thinness reflected the Hellcat's original World War II design philosophy: speed and firepower over armour. Worse still, the turret was open-topped, leaving the crew exposed not only to weather and shrapnel, but also to infantry fire, grenades, and air-burst munitions. While the design had once been useful for improving visibility in ambushes, on the battlefields of the 1990s it left the crew highly vulnerable, making the T-55 M18 a tank with a strong body but a fatally weak head. The T-55 M18 retained the main weapon of the Hellcat, the American 76mm M1 gun. However, the commander's 50 caliber Browning machine gun was missing, as the entire ring mount had been cut away from the turret. In its original design, the M1 gun was mounted at a 45-degree angle inside the Hellcat's turret, a layout intended to save space and ease the loader's work. It had an elevation range of plus 20 degrees to minus 10 degrees. Over the course of M18 production, 3 versions of the gun were used: the M1A1, the M1A1C, and the M1A2. Both the A1C and A2 featured a threaded barrel to mount a muzzle brake, and the example fitted to the T-55 M18 was likely the M1A2, which also had a faster rifling twist for improved accuracy. Originally, the 76mm was introduced as a more powerful alternative to the 75mm M3 gun used on the Sherman. Though its high explosive shell was weaker, its higher velocity gave it far greater armour-piercing performance. The gun's standard M62 armoured piercing capped round left the barrel at 792 metres per second, allowing it to penetrate around 93mm of sloped armour at 457 metres. The more advanced M93A1 high-velocity round reached 1036 metres per second and could pierce up to 157mm under the same conditions. These figures made the weapon highly effective against late World War II armour. But by the 1990s, its performance was badly outmatched by Cold War tanks. Still, the gun offered some flexibility, as it could fire not only armour-piercing rounds, but also high-explosive shells, like the M42A1, and smoke rounds such as the M88. This gave the hybrid at least some versatility on the modern battlefield, particularly in Bosnia, where tank-on-tank engagements were rare during the Civil War, and most armoured vehicles were employed primarily in the infantry support role. The T-55 M18 kept the standard T-55 power pack, located at the rear of the hull. It was driven by the V-55, a liquid-cooled V12 diesel-producing 580 horsepower, an evolution of the wartime V2 engine that had powered tanks like the T-34, KV and IS series. Mounted transversely, the V-55 saved space compared to older longitudinal setups, and was paired with a transmission offering 5 forward and 1 reverse gear. In its original form, the T-55 could reach 50 km an hour on roads and around 27 km an hour cross-country, with the lighter M18 turret replacing the standard T-55s. This hybrid may have been slightly faster. Suspension followed the classic T-54, T-55 design. Torsion bars with 5 large road wheels on each side. The first wheel was spaced further forward, while the first and fifth carried hydraulic shock absorbers. The drive sprocket sat at the rear, the idler at the front, and the tracks rode directly over the wheels without return rollers, a staple design feature of many Soviet-tracked vehicles. The hybrid retained a 4-man crew. The driver was positioned front left in the hull, while the turret housed the commander, gunner, and loader. Space was tight, but the open-top turret allowed easier operation. Ammunition stowage remains uncertain. The turret's 9-round ready rack was still in place, but it is unclear how many additional 76mm shells were stored in the hull. Given their smaller size compared to 100mm rounds, the capacity may have been greater than a standard T-55. Equipment fit was basic. The gunner likely had an M47 or M47A2 telescopic sight, while turret stowage bins and baskets offered extra space. Whether the turret retained power traverse or even a functional radio is unknown. Externally, the hull appeared almost identical to any T-55, with standard periscopes, infrared-capable headlights, tow hooks, side-mounted bins and fuel tanks, and mounts for rear external drums. It is difficult to say whether the T-55 M18 would have been good or bad at its intended role, primarily due to the fact that it is not exactly known what that intended role was. Had it been built for crew training, it likely would have been a fine vehicle for its purpose. If it was intended for use in combat, the viability of the makeshift vehicle becomes dubious. The decent armour of the T-55 hull would be completely nullified by the extremely thin and exposed M18 turret. However, the vehicle would have remained quite mobile, and the firepower provided by the 76mm gun would have been capable of defeating older World War II era vehicles that certainly were present throughout the Bosnian War. The gun was likely capable of still penetrating the armour of more modern tanks from the sides or rear if the crew was lucky. Due to the rarity of armour-on-armour engagements, the lack of penetration was less of an issue. Nevertheless, the T-55 M18 was completely inferior to a standard T-55 in basically every imaginable way, other than being somewhat lighter and debatably providing the crew with better situational awareness due to its open-top turret. No matter how it would have been used, and whether it was used by the ARBIH, the VRS or the JNA, the T-55 M18 hybrid was a less than ideal vehicle to be used in combat. But due to the anomalous fighting conditions of the Bosnian War, it could still be a valuable asset under the right circumstances. After the war, the fate of the T-55 M18 was unfortunately almost certainly that of the scrapyard, as many armoured fighting vehicles were ordered to be destroyed after the Bosnian War in order to de-escalate the situation in the Balkans following the Yugoslav wars. This concludes our video on the T-55 M18. What do you think of this strange hybrid vehicle? Are there any other interesting tank mashups you would like us to cover? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. We want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Barrett Guntur, Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Shuford, Leslie Holcower, Michael Herman, Owen M, R. Rob and Sopwith21. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.